Did you feel you were abandoning your homeland?
No, I didn't feel I abandoned my homeland. Not when I moved to London, and not when I moved to San Francisco, where we're just in the process of doing that. I think there's a lot of emotions in that debate in general. And I think at the end of the day, it's very simple. You either come to the Valley and compete with the best, or you stay home and you play with the losers. That's what I read somewhere. But I think there is something interesting here, that it is good for a place if there are a lot of competitive people. And I think that's definitely an advantage
of being here.
In the Valley, of being in the Valley. And yeah.
So the people who are trying to build startups in London now, the Spotify, let's pick an example, like you're saying they're losers because they haven't moved here, you're saying?
No, I mean, seriously, that's something that I read somewhere.
I mean, not to put your own words in your mouth, but
no.
but you do seriously believe that the only place you could like for Europeans, the only place where they can measure true success would be by moving here and competing in the Valley?
I think it's what you want. What I said before. I think if you want to compete with the best players, with other companies, if you actually want to know how good you are, I think it is a good idea to come to the Valley.
Right.
I think because ultimately there are a lot of smart people here because it's a very competitive environment.
Right.
Now, if you're happy to be somewhere where you can be, a leading company in a smaller market, that's great, but that's a personal choice.
So I'm curious, who is it that is measuring you in this competitive field? Because we've seen a bunch of numbers. I mean, Fred Wilson recently did an interview, I think today, saying that something like 80% of Facebook, Google, Twitter's traffic is all coming from overseas. So we're no longer the biggest internet market. So some people would argue going forward, we don't necessarily know what makes a good company. So is it more how you rank within the echo chamber versus how you rank among users in the world?
I don't know. I mean, maybe partly because I didn't understand the question, but
well, I guess the question is, what are you?
That would be a reason to not know the answer.
We should have a translator. You only lived in the UK for what, 10 years?
Paul, would you like to translate?
Are you just trying to impress the Web 2.0 ecosystem, or is it genuine business success you believe you can only achieve here?
Yeah, because my point being, increasingly the U.S. used to be the biggest market for the internet in the world. So it made sense that you had to be in the U.S. in order to know what that big market wants. That's no longer the case. So a lot of people feel like in the U.S. we're losing touch with what the global internet market wants. Yep. So who is it that's measuring your success? Who is it that you're trying to rank among here? Is it peers? Is it what investors think of you? I mean, what is that that's still in the Valley?
Let's get 2 steps back. For us, the reason why we're here is because we can meet great people and great talent. And I think that's clearly an advantage of the Valley over Europe, because you can have discussions here. You might even be allowed to dream more about your product or about what type of company you want to create. And I think that's maybe it is that this country allows the dreaming a bit more to happen than in Europe, where it is really, if you start something, people are very, very fast to tell you how you're not succeed. They're very, very fast to tell you this can never happen. And I think as a result of that, really innovative companies, and I know there is the odd excuse here and there, are rare. And I think that's for us the main benefit of being here, because there are so many great people here that built great companies in the past and that we can work with.
Mm-hmm. So let's be fair to London for a minute. What would you say the advantages of London are? What things about London do you miss? I mean, you haven't been here necessarily long enough to answer that, but what does London bring that, say, here doesn't bring?
Yeah. No, I mean,
I'm
trying to come up.
With a single thing.
I'm trying to find my words. Maybe a realistic sense of the business behind an idea. I think that's why Europe is very good in the B2B market. I think startups that I met and friends that I have who have startups in London. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of planning involved, what market to address, how to address these markets. They try to understand the customer and the business model, probably more so than the product. Where here in the Valley, I mean, you have lots of people talking about it is about a great product, and a great product will find a market. maybe those are different approaches.
What do you think? I mean, what I heard you say when you moved here is that you were really sick of the cynicism in London. I mean, it sounds like a similar point.
So I actually had a weird. The first time I ever met Jason Calacanis, of all people, he was in the audience and I was on a panel at a thing in London, and he stood up and he decided in his Calacanis-y way to tell everybody that what he disliked about London was that it was so discouraging to founders, and it was always. And he said he was at a dinner the previous night, and everyone had been criticising everything, and he was saying, you know, like that's maybe a great way to raise your kids is to keep telling them where they're going wrong, but which I sort of disagree on, but it's not a good way to encourage startups. And I said something pithy from the panels along the lines of, well, you know, that doesn't sound like a great way to raise your kids. It seems to be a reason why so many American kids are in therapy compared to British kids. But I, at the time, was like, said, no, actually, I think it's more realistic here. My point was, there's something good about London. To your point, Bastian, about the people have to look at the business, because the first question people ask you is, well, what's the business? There just isn't enough slack. And there's just not enough. And
well, there's not just assloads of money.
Yeah, and also,
running around the system.
And everyone wants you to fail.
It. Yeah.
And there's also that problem in the UK where if you fail once, and everyone said this, if you fail once, you're out. Like, or at least it's hard. Whereas here, failure is considered rite of passage. I'm becoming. The more I did 2 startups, so maybe, and they were both fucking disasters. So maybe I'm now biased the other way. Maybe I like a bit more encouragement and a bit more of a chance to fail, but. I actually do think there's an unhealthy cynicism in the UK that basically says that wants everyone to fail. Like when in the UK when you see somebody succeed, there seems to be a sense of like it takes something from you. Like it's a zero-sum game, and so people get very pissy about other people's success. Whereas here it seems to be the opposite. People are like, wow, you've achieved. And even though I've always thought this idea of the American dream and anyone can become president is kind of bullshit, there does seem to be a sense here that people like seeing success because they believe it indicates that they too will have the same success. So that's.
But in regards to your point, failing, I think that's an interesting one, because I believe that if you're here, you can figure out way faster if you fail. Yeah. And I think that's ultimately to your advantage, because you can sit in other places where the environment is not as competitive. You can potter around for a year, for longer. You find hundreds of excuses why your product is not taking off. And ultimately, it can take you a long time to fail. And being here, I think you can figure that out in a couple of months. You burn through the seed funding that you have. You need to ultimately focus on the really important points, and you have an environment that you can reflect these ideas on.
I mean, maybe you figure out ways to iterate more quickly, but in terms of like utter failure, it takes companies forever to go out of business here. Like forever to go out of business, because there's always more money, and everyone can sort of like stretch dollars so much, and people are used to, you know, working for a small salary when they want to found something, they believe in something, or maybe they've made a little bit of money, or they have a friend with some money, they can crash on a couch. I mean, it's the bootstrapping way of life, the money, it takes forever for companies to go out of business. Whereas in London, I was there in, I guess, November of 2008. And between November and June, like half the companies I'd met with had gone out of business as soon as the recession started, whereas almost no one here had gone out of business. It gets contracted so quick in Europe, and I think that's healthy, because here companies limp along and you're holding up talent.
I think weirdly there's more encouragement in the UK. Like the press wants, like, I always use Spotify, so I'll use other examples, but if I can think of one, but there's lots of companies that people really want to succeed in the UK, and long after they're basically done, and I don't think Spotify's done, but there are some that are clearly done, and yet we still see in the press that they're going to succeed because we so want another Skype or another whatever. Bebo, right, and which clearly wasn't a success, and yet we hold it up as a success. I mean, it had a successful exit. Michael Birch was a success, but the business doesn't exist anymore, and it was just sold for fuck
some
all.
losers.
So just some losers for fuck all. So it's some weird.
But isn't it funny, Sarah? Isn't it funny that we see? I mean, no, I lived in London for the last 4 years, and you lived here and you traveled a lot. But isn't it interesting that I see it that it's an advantage of the Valley that you can fail here fast, and you see it the opposite way? Maybe that's a problem that we have in general. Like that's two different views. Maybe that's part of maybe it's an argument that no side can win.
And yet I don't see a huge number of Valley startups saying, I'm going to move to London. The
Well,
grass is greener
I
there.
think the discrepancy between our point is I'm looking at it from a funding point of view, and money's always propping these things up. You're looking at it from sort of a self-directed, this approach isn't working, let's bob and weave and do this. And I think both are the case. I think probably
yeah.
companies they're always adjusting, right? I mean, that's how they're raising more money. But in terms of so it's like, I guess, micro stage failure within a company versus company going out of business.
Yeah.
So what do you, okay, so you believe that being here is going to decide very quickly whether you're going to succeed or fail, you know, with Curated By. What's your plan? Now you've landed here, you've moved the business here. Are you recruiting here, or is it just...
Yeah, we're looking to recruit here. So that obviously is difficult here, and probably more difficult than it is in London or in Berlin. Mm-hmm. But I guess it's part of the journey, being here. I don't know if that's the biggest disadvantage. Maybe at the beginning, but I think if you succeed in creating a company that people like, I think it can also very easily turn the other way. And then it's easier to hire here. You know, it is probably hard in the first 2 months, but once you have the first users, if you find early adopters that embrace your product, if you can show some traction, if you show a product that works and that drives some benefit to some whatever subset of users that is, and people know about your company, I think it's people have more belief in your company at that point. And that's probably something that's easier here. Where to start, it's probably easier to find a developer in Berlin or in London because wages are less, because more people probably are unemployed, because there is just more talent available. But they're still hesitant to join a company that already has a small name because it is a startup. I think that's just a cultural thing in general in Europe. I definitely know it from Germany, and I think it's still part in London, outside that small group of startups that exist. If you talk to someone, a normal employee, they would always have questions, they raise concerns about, is that a stable business? How can I have the guarantee that you guys are not going out of business soon? How long does the funding last? Et cetera, et cetera.
Right, and you know, we got to wrap up in a second, but I just want to make the point, whenever I travel and talk to people, they always say, in America, and then say exactly what you just said, rather than in Silicon Valley. Because in the rest of America, this is definitely not the case. I mean, it is a very, very unique Silicon Valley.
Did I just say Silicon Valley, or did I say America?
No. I think you said here.
Yeah.
So,
but here,
just,
I mean the Valley.
Clarify.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So you've had the Scoble video, you've been on TechCrunch TV.
Yeah.
I mean, you've made it. I mean, the only way is up now. Bastian, Lehmann, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Join us next week on Why Is This News?